Snakes are famous for being able to devour prey that is many times larger than they are. But how do they do it? How does a snake eat food bigger than its head or even its body? And why don't these large meals get stuck in their narrow throats? Well, there are some answers for this that will surprise you, so let's find out more in today's episode of Animal Logic. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Animal Logic, where we try to answer some of the many questions you might have about the natural world that you may have never thought to ask. I'm your host, and today we're going to be answering a question that I personally have had since I was young and I saw a snake swallowing a mouse on TV for the first time. I couldn't help but think, how does the snake eat food that is bigger than it is? Like, how did it even fit inside the snake? The question still remained even after I learned that snakes are able to unhinge their jaws and detach them from their skulls, which allows them to open their mouths much wider than any other animal with a similar jaw structure. But I digress. We're here to talk about how snakes are able to eat prey that is so much bigger than them. And while there are many different factors at play here, the most important one to consider is actually flexibility. Yes, that's right. Some animals just have more flexible skeletons than others, and this gives them some pretty crazy advantages over other species. For example, there are a variety of birds known as true toads that are able to bend their spines backwards and forwards. To make up for their lack of teeth, they use their flexible spines to manipulate their tongues in order to lap up water and slurp up small insects that they come across. You see, their snouts aren't very strong, so they can't really catch fish like other birds. Instead, they must passively wait for aquatic insects and other small invertebrates to drift too close to their long, thin tongues, which they then flick in and out to catch their meal. These true toads can also turn their feet around and face backwards, which allows them to grip branches while they're hanging upside down. This comes in handy when they're sleeping, since they tend to sleep while hanging from branches, and when they're eating, since hanging upside down makes it easier for them to gulp down their prey. Because gravity helps push their food down their throats, but this also requires a flexible spine. And it's not just birds that have flexible spines. Turtles and tortoises do too. That's how they're able to retract their heads into their shells and live their cute little turtle lives. But maybe you didn't know that turtles and tortoises belong to a group called reptiles, just like snakes do. It turns out that all reptiles have flexible skeletons, which means that snakes aren't the only ones that are able to eat large prey. Lizards are also reptiles, and they can also unfurl their flexible spines, except they usually unfurl their spines in order to catch their prey. Take the monitor lizard, for example. Monitor lizards are somewhat similar to snakes in that they are carnivorous reptiles that ambush their unsuspecting prey. But unlike snakes, monitor lizards don't swallow their food whole. Instead, they use their flexible spines to quickly coil their bodies around their prey in order to constrict them, before making their way towards their victim's head and delivering a fatal bite. In fact, almost all lizards are able to change the shape of their bodies by moving their ribs sideways, which allows them to squeeze through small spaces and ambush their prey. Even the smallest lizards have flexible skeletons, which is kind of weird because you wouldn't think that something as tiny as a gecko needs to be able to squeeze through small spaces or eat large prey. However, this ability could be useful if the gecko is trying to hide from a predator or trying to crawl through a small space in order to lay eggs. But geckos are already small enough that they probably won't need to eat particularly large prey. So why do they bother having flexible skeletons? Well, it turns out that this adaptation isn't exclusive to reptiles. Many fish also have flexible spines, and this allows them to do all sorts of amazing things. For example, eels can change the curvature of their bodies from side to side, which allows them to move through the water in a unique way that's very efficient for navigating through rocks and coral reefs. Another example is mudskippers. Mudskippers are amphibious fish that spend a lot of time on land, and their flexible spines allow them to slither around on land, kind of like snakes do. There are also fish that are able to bend their spines in ways that allow them to capture prey, like catfish, which are able to curl their bodies around prey in order to suck them into their mouths. This brings us back to our original question. Do you remember? Snakes are able to unhinge their jaws and detach them from their skulls in order to open their mouths extremely wide, allowing them to fit much larger prey inside. But this is just another adaptation that allows snakes to take advantage of having flexible spines. Not only does having flexible spines allow snakes to consume large prey, but it also allows them to digest that prey more efficiently. You see, a snake's digestive system is basically just a tube with a few important organs along the way that help break down the snake's food. The esophagus connects the snake's mouth to its stomach, where the majority of the digestion takes place. And at the end of the digestive tract is the cloaca, which is where the digested food exits the snake's body. A snake's digestive system is very similar to ours, except it's missing some key components, like a pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. However, the snake's stomach contains glands that produce digestive juices, which are secreted into the stomach to break down the snake's food. Once the food has been sufficiently broken down, it's sent along the rest of the digestive tract and out of the body. But what happens if the snake accidentally eats something that's too big for its stomach to digest? Well, that's where the snake's flexible spine comes in again. Because snakes are able to move the bones in their spines independently from each other, they can squeeze their bodies in order to push whatever is stuck through the rest of their digestive tract and out of their cloaca. Of course, this doesn't work if the object is too big to fit through the opening of the cloaca, but it should be able to handle most situations. Also, this should be done carefully, because if the snake squeezes too hard, it could rupture its stomach and die. However, there are instances where a snake can't simply wait for its food to be digested. Take, for example, the African rock python, which is known for eating relatively large prey, including birds, monkeys, and occasionally humans. If the python tries to swallow a meal that is too large for its stomach to digest, it will actually suffocate. This is because the snake's lungs are located in the rib cage, which means that if its stomach is full, it won't be able to breathe. In order to prevent this, African rock pythons and several other species of python have evolved to have their stomachs outside of their body. This means that their stomach is essentially a bag that hangs from the rest of their digestive tract and is free to move around in their rib cages. When the python has eaten a large meal, it will temporarily fill its lungs with air, then squeeze its body to force the meal down its throat and into its stomach. Once the meal is in its stomach, the python will then deflate its lungs and be able to breathe normally again. It's pretty incredible that snakes are able to eat such large meals, especially considering that they don't have teeth to hold onto their food while they're swallowing it. To make up for this, snakes have specially adapted scales on the roof of their mouths, called palatine scales, that serve the same function as human teeth. These scales are curved backwards, which allows them to catch on to whatever the snake is trying to eat and hold it in place while the snake swallows it down. It's also worth mentioning that snakes don't chew their food, so they don't really need teeth to tear it into smaller pieces. Finally, it's worth noting that snakes aren't the only animals that are able to eat large prey. Take, for example, pelicans, which are able to eat fish twice the size of their heads. This is thanks to their elastic skin, which allows their stomachs to stretch and expand when they swallow large fish. Similarly, whales are able to eat hundreds of thousands of krill every day, which is equivalent to roughly 400,000 pounds of food. Whales are able to do this because their stomachs are essentially just big sacs made out of incredibly stretchy skin. As you can probably tell, there's a common theme here. The animals that are able to eat the largest prey also have flexible skeletons and/or digestive systems. But there are probably plenty of exceptions to this rule that we just haven't discovered yet. Maybe there's a beetle somewhere that eats a meal the size of its entire body, or a bird that eats prey twice its size. But until we discover those animals, we can marvel at the amazing abilities of the ones we already know about, and wonder how many more surprises the natural world has in store for us. So I hope you enjoyed learning about why snakes can swallow prey many times larger than their bodies. If you did, make sure to leave us a like and share this video with your fellow nature lovers. And if you'd like to submit your own questions, you can do so using the link in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, and from all of us here at the channel, I'll see you next time for another episode of Animal Logic.